Good morning, everybody. We hope you're well. We are group number 5, and in this time, we have the opportunity to explain to you about the domestic influence. So, let's begin with our presentation. As most as you know, the foreign policy has many approaches to create and make it work as well. One of these approaches is the domestic influence. So, the domestic influence are in the domestic level of analysis and try to explain, in contrast to realism, that international results come from the approach inside states and not just among states, because the decisions and actions of states in the international field is the result of human choices, like political leaders, diplomats, and bureaucrats, and states' internal structures. By in contrast to realism, we mean that domestic influence try to dismiss the premise that states are the main actors in the international field, and they make decisions by themselves without taking into account individuals inside them. This means that in public opinion, interest groups have a lot of influence on the foreign policy process. Okay, now we're going to continue, and I'm going to explain about bureaucracies. Well, the bureaucratic agencies are one of the actors that influence the state's actions and decisions in the international society, and are used for developing and implementing foreign policy. So these foreign policies bureaucracies are diverse, but they share some common aspects and elements, such as diplomats and interagency tensions. The first one are the diplomats. They can work in embassies and consulates or coordinate foreign policy, so they are decided by states to represent them to other states and to international organizations, right? So their main role is to implement foreign policy, but also provide information and create information screens that go into making those policies and orient political leaders and their appointees. So according to the Cambridge Dictionary, as you can see on the screen, a diplomat is an official whose job is to represent one country in another and who usually works in an embassy. In the case of democracies, diplomats as political appointees can come and go with change in government leaders, or can be career diplomats who hold class change in government's administrations. So, nevertheless, foreign ministry bureaucrats are always making foreign relations so regulate that a country's relation cannot be altered so easily by political leaders and appointees. So, usually, politicians have disagreement with career diplomats and formal bureaucratic agencies because the second ones don't have loyalty to them, so they cannot control them easily. So this tension between politicians and bureaucracy agencies makes the first one ignore or bypass the regular channels of diplomacy. And remember that the size of a bureaucratic agency does not guarantee their power. The agency tensions. Well, this can disprove a good formulation of foreign policy due to the fact that the bureaucratic agency dispute with each other, which shapes that foreign policy that emerge because each one promotes policy that will be benefit them in terms of capability and powers. Remember that where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. That saying means that the job title of participants and where they sit about the bureaucratic structure, right? Allow others to foresee what is the posture, the point of view, and how they will argue in political topics, but do that to give a goal for the instruments and the institutions. It is not always probable to predict their preference. These interactions, that and negotiations between agencies of the same political administration are the key tool for the government bargaining model. So, to sum up, the influence of bureaucratic rivalry of foreign policy challenges the conception of realism that we have studied already, that consider that they as unitary actors in the international system since they don't have any single list of goals. This is better known as national interest, right? So, but all they do are the result of the bargaining of subgroups with their own list of goals. Finally, it is important to emphasize that there are many more state actors with their own goals and that want to advance by influencing foreign policy than just bureaucratic agency. That's all for me, and my partner is going to continue. Thank you.
All right. We're going to see the interest groups. Now, the interest groups are coalitions of people who share a common interest in the outcome of some political issue and who organize themselves to try to influence the outcome. The foreign policies of a state are usually shaped by the process of domestic coalition formation or the dialectic between groups. Interest groups exert policy through different tools. For example, in pluralistic democracies, parties influence foreign policy through interest groups and political parties, and in the case of dictatorships, it occurs but less visibly. An example of interest groups influencing foreign policies is business, labor unions, churches, senior citizens, or citizens concerned about an issue such as climate change. Another important term is lobbying, which means the process of talking with legislators or officials to influence their decisions on some set of issues. The elements for a good lobbying are the following. The first one is ability to gain a hearing with busy officials. The second one is ability to present cogent arguments for one's case. And the last one is the ability to trade favors in return for positive actions on an issue. These favors we just mentioned can be legal or illegal. For example, campaign contributions, dinners at night restaurants, trips to golf resorts, security, illicit sexual liaisons, or paying bribes. Most of the time, a major problem in governmental decisions, internal and foreign, is corruption, before which interest groups try to influence and endorse governments officials by illegal channels and make actions that are convenient for them. As we can see, interest groups, as previously analyzed in bureaucratic agencies, have their own interests in that. If gathered, can make up the national interest or the interests of society as a whole, which question the fact that the state is seen as a unitary actor. Nevertheless, there are some theories that question these previous perceptions, such as Marxism, which says that the key domestic influence on foreign policy is in capitalist countries are rich owners of big business. All previous information that we have studied up to now can be better explained laying down some bullet points and their examples. So here's some bullet points so you can understand. The first one is the size of bureaucratic agencies does not assure its power. In some cases, political leaders appoint a close friend or key advisor to handle the foreign policy bureaucracy. And the frustration with the bureaucracy conduct political leaders to dismiss the formulation of foreign policy is affected by interagency tensions. Another important aspect to be considered by government's bargain model are the interagency negotiations are resolved from conflicts in interest between agencies of the same government. It's not always possible to predict the preferences of leaders of bureaucracy agencies, given the goals of their institution. And last one is the interest groups organize themselves to try to influence the outcome. Now, this next topic we're about to see is the military industry complex. Yeah? So what is this? First of all, it's important to understand what this concept means. So it refers to a huge interlocking network of governmental agencies, industrial corporations, and research institutes working together to supply a nation's military forces to promote and benefit from military spending. For sure, like many other events, the military industry complex was a response to the growing importance of technology, nuclear weapons, and electronics, for instance, and of logistics in Cold War military planning. So when was this concept born, the military industry complex concept? Well, actually the term properly was used for the very first time by the US President Dwight Eisenhower in his farewell address on 1961. Eisenhower warned that the United States must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military industry complex. As we saw, this concept was born during the well-known Cold War, the clash between the two base powers of that moment. Of course, at war, the states tend to emphasize a great part of their attention and energies to military industry complex. The thing is, during Cold War, it happened like never before. Military procurement occurred on a massive scale in non-alleged peacetime, as the superpowers raced to develop new high-technology weapons for threatening each other as used in this war. Thanks.
I will continue explaining this topic. First of all, we have a question. What constituencies encompasses this complex? This complex is so big that encompasses many and varied constituencies, each of which has an interest in military spending, and these are the followings. First, we have corporations. These corporations produce goods for the military profit from government contracts. Also, we have military officers. These are whose careers advance by building bureaucratic empires around a new weapon system. And also, we have universities and scientific institutes. Basically, they receive military research contracts, which was actually a major source of funding for scientists during the Cold War. Therefore, a new question arises. How do the military complex works? Like we previously saw, this complex is divided in many constituencies. For instance, subcontractors and part suppliers for the big U.S. weapons projects are usually spread around many states and congressional districts so that local citizens and politicians join the list of constituents benefiting somehow from military spending. This same phenomenon has emerged in the European community, where weapons development programs have been somehow parceled out to several European states. For example, a new fighter jet is less likely to be cancelled if one country gets the contract for the wings, another for the engines, and so forth. So if they focused all of the resources of a weapons project in just one place, it would be way more difficult working for them. In addition to that, we are going to talk about now public opinion. First, we have to know what is the public opinion and why is it so important in the international affairs. Well, the public opinion in international affairs refer to the range of views on foreign policy issues held by the citizens of a state. Once clarified, it is relevant to emphasize that public opinion is so important in international relations that many domestic actors seek to influence this one. Obviously, public opinion has a greater influence in democracies than in authoritarian governments. And nevertheless, even dictators must listen to their people. They need, if not obeying the public opinion, but listening and being aware of it. So every single government in every presentation needs legitimacy because at the very end, policies are carried out and obeyed by ordinary people. In other words, by his citizens. And regardless their economic or social position, so government needs to somehow persuade citizens to accept its policies. The last statement is the reason why many governments spend a lot of time and resources in propaganda for their official line, and it is with the main goal of winning the support of their citizens for foreign policies. And the states basically use as many available resources as they can, such as televisions, newspapers, social media, and official government channels of information, and many others, right? Having said the above, we can ask ourselves now, how does a government can manipulate information for their own benefit? First, we have to understand that independent journalists and governments are in a constant conflict because they filter the information whether a government approves it or not, or at least that's how it should work. And yeah, basically, journalists are watchdogs, or so-called watchdogs, because they critique actions of governments and try to uncover why they try to hide. However, here comes the manipulation. And yeah, Media and journalists are ironically depends on government for information. So when getting information from them, governments can manipulate and feed journalists with biased information in order to, so to speak, shape the news. So it might shape and change the public opinion about anything that matters to the governments. And yeah, basically, the best way to understand this topic is through examples. And here are three of them. The first one is how public opinion towards the development and result of a war might determine important stuff such as whether a governor stays or is forced to leave. And the second one shows how media can manipulate the public opinion for being against or supportive to a cause. And the last one, the third one, basically is how public opinion works. And here we can talk about referendums, and that US, for example, are not used to work with this, and they actually do not use it at all. And it is the opposite on other countries like Switzerland and Denmark that officially use this instrument. So yeah, basically the referendum is an instrument that shows the power of public opinion per se. Finally, there are some important concepts required to completely understand this topic, and my partner would talk about this from now on. Thanks.
I will continue this topic. Well, attentive public. In a democracy is the minority of the population that stays informed about the international issues. The most active members of the attentive public on foreign affairs constitute a foreign policy in this slide. And these elites include people with the government as well as outsiders such as business people, journalists, lobbyists, and professors of the political science. There's the last important concept, the rally around the flag syndrome. With the syndrome, the public inscribes support for the government leaders during wartime, at the last in the short term. So government sometimes adopt foreign policies for the specific purpose of generating public approval and hence gaining domestic legitimacy. This is the case when the government undertakes a war on foreign military interventions at a time of domestic difficulty to drastic attention and gain public support. On the other hand, legislators. It's important to note that legislature serves as the one counting through which an interest group in the public opinion will influence legislatures. Some democracies, such as the United States, have a presidential system in which democracies and the legislature's bodies are elected apart from the president, also referred to as executive. In this system, legislatures play a direct role in the making foreign policies by passing budgets, regulating bureaucratic rules, creating trade law, and even controlling immigration policies. Also, executives may attend summits and talks. Any agreements they see must be approved by their domestic legislatures. Also, few will argue the legislatures in the president democracies that not influence foreign policy generally. Different rules may apply to the use of military force. Some contend that legislatures, like a public opinion, rally around the flag during times of international crisis. For example, 3 days after September 11, 2001 attacks, the U.S. Congress voted to give President Bush full authority to prosecute the war in Afghanistan. In October 2002, Congress passed the resolution authorizing the use of the force in Iraq. These legislatures rarely ever challenge an executive on the important military matters. Others point to a different dynamic in which legislatures stand up to executive power regarding military force. For example, because legislatures have the purse strings, it's the ability to approve of reject a new spending that have the ability to stop in a war in its tracks. In the United States, the War Powers Act, igniting the writing the clause of the Vietnam War, required the president to notify the Congress when the U.S. troops are deployed for the combat. After this notification, the president has 60 days plus possible 30 days extensions to recall the troops unless Congress specifically approves the military action. In parliamentary systems such as the Great Britain executive, for example, prime ministers are chosen by the political parties that hold a domination position in legislature bodies. Often, parliamentary executives do not need to submit treaties or policies for formal approval by the legislatures. Yet, the legislatures in parliamentary system still hold power regarding for life policies. It's vital to know the figure of the Premier Minister plays a fundamental role in the British system. As the United Kingdom in parliamentary monarchy, which has a written constitution, is the constitutional system is based primarily on the so-called state law. Legislatures pillar a common law similar to a statute such as the Magna Carta of the 1215 in Great Britain, for example. Parliamentary is not required to vote on international agreements not ratified. Negotiated by the Prime Minister, but it must approve any change to British laws that such agreement entail, because most international agreements do involve these types of change. Parliamentary effectively exercise of right of ratification over international agreements. In many parliamentary systems, if a policy is controversial. Parties that do not have a majority in the legislatures can attempt to call elections, meaning that the country votes again, and which parties will hold seats in the legislatures. In the different parties with the majority of seats, a new executive is appointed. Finally, thus in parliamentary system, legislators play a key role in designing and implementing foreign policies.
Now we are going to talk about making foreign policy. But first, we have to wonder, what are foreign policies? Well, foreign policies are the strategies that governments use to guide their actions in the international arena. Foreign policies spell out the objectives state leaders have decided to pursue in a given relationship or situation. But in general, international relations scholars are more interested in the foreign policy process and how policies are arrived at and implemented. The interests of a state are based on established various organizational structures and functional relationships to create and carry out foreign policies. IR scholars are especially interested in exploring whether certain kinds of policy processes lead to certain kinds of decisions, whether certain processes produce better outcomes for the state's self-defined interests than others do. Also, it exists comparative foreign policy. This is the study of foreign policy in various states to discover whether similar types of societies or governments consistently have similar types of foreign policies. Such studies have focused on three characteristics: size, wealth, and extent of democratic participation in government. Unfortunately, no simple rule has been found to predict a state's warlike tendency based on these attributes. States vary greatly from one to another and even within a single state over time. For example, both capitalist and communist states have proven capable of naked aggressions or peaceful behavior depending on circumstances. Some political scientists have tried to interpret particular states' foreign policies in terms of each one's political culture and history. On the other hand, the foreign policy outcomes result from multiple forces at various levels of analysis. The outcomes depends on individual decision makers, on the type of society and government they are working within, and on the international and global context of their actions. The study of foreign policy processes runs counter to realism's assumptions of a unitary state actor, because the study of foreign policy concentrates on forces within the state, and its main emphasis is on the individual and domestic levels of analysis. And the different foreign policy process from one state to another are also influenced by a state's type of government, such as military dictatorship, communist party rule, one-party non-communist rule, and various forms of multi-party democracy. Relatively, democratic states tend to share values and interests and hence tend to get along better with each other than with non-democracies. Individual elements of the foreign policy process add much complexity and unpredictability. One area of foreign policy in which knowledge stands on a somewhat firmer basis is the descriptive effort to understand how particular mechanisms of foreign policy formation operate in various states. Such approaches belong to the field of comparative politics. Foreign policy has ceased to be designed by a professional or political elite and has incorporated in its elaboration various domestic policy issues and decisions, such as political parties, the leadership of civil society, trade unions, intermediate organizations, the media, academia, technology and information technology, and parliament and its new international role. In foreign policy, it is important to respect the constitutional and institutional norms that create the country's diplomatic service. Foreign policy is a necessity for states, and it is an intellectual and pragmatic task that must consider national interests, state policies, and the weight of civil society. In short, understanding the international relations of the New World and working on the study and formulation of consolidated foreign policy and diplomacy is a element for the development and insertion of a country. To summarize, foreign policy is a complex outcome of a complex process. It results from the struggle of competing domestic interests, and competing government agencies. No single individual, agency, or guiding principle determines the outcome. Yet, foreign policy does achieve a certain overall coherence. States form foreign policy on an issue or towards a region. In conclusion, we can see that the importance of studying the domestic constituencies, interest groups, because they have different interests in foreign policies and often organize politically to promote those interests. Prominent among domestic constituencies, especially in the United States and Russia, and especially during the Cold War, have been military-industrial complexes consisting of military industries and others with an interest in high military spending. Public opinion influenced governments' foreign policy decisions, more so in democracies than in authoritarian states, but governments also manipulate public opinion. The legislatures can provide a conduit for public opinion and interest groups to influence foreign policy. Executives and legislators may differ on how best to achieve a state's national interest. And last but not less important, we can see that foreign policies are strategies that governments use to guide their actions toward other states. The foreign policy process is the set of procedures and structures that states use to make foreign policy decisions and to implement them. Well, that's all for our presentation. Thanks for your attention, and we hope you learn about domestic influence. Goodbye.